He was a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life, a man with nothing left to lose but the dust on his boots. She was a titan, a woman of immense stature and iron will who had everything to protect. When Martha Blevins, the giant widow of Blevins Bend, rode onto Cody Boone's desolate, sun-scorched ranch, she wasn't offering a handout. She wasn't offering a word of sympathy for his troubles. She was offering a contract, a proposition so outlandish, so raw, it could either be his salvation or his final damnation. She reined in a horse as black as midnight, the animal's hooves churning the very soil Cody was about to lose. From her vantage point in the saddle, she looked down on him, not with contempt, but with an unnerving, calculating intensity. "Boone," she declared, her voice as steady as the mountains, "I need a husband." Cody just stared, the lukewarm coffee in his hand long forgotten. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. What could he possibly have that Martha Blevins would want? His good name. That was about as worthless as his deed. But she wasn't finished. She held his gaze, and her next words knocked the very air from his lungs, shaking the foundations of his grief-stricken world. "I need a husband," she repeated, her voice lowering slightly, but losing none of its power. "And you need a strong daughter." Cody froze. The world tilted. The wind died. The dust settled. The words didn't make sense. They were a cruel, twisted joke. A phantom limb of grief ached in his soul. He could barely get the words out, his voice a whisper of poison and ash. "My daughter is dead." He had buried her himself, right next to her mother 2 years ago. Lung fever, the doctor had said, a swift and merciless thief that had followed the fire that took his barn, stealing what little the flames had left behind. Martha Blevins finally swung her massive frame from the saddle, landing with a solid thud that seemed to shake the porch. Her height was even more imposing on foot, her shadow falling over him like a storm cloud. "No, Boone," she said, and her voice dropped to an intense, serious tone that cut through his haze of confusion. "You buried an empty coffin. The doctor lied to you. Your daughter, Sarah, is alive." The world, which had tilted moments before, now spun completely off its axis. Cody shot to his feet, the forgotten coffee cup crashing to the floorboards. A surge of adrenaline he hadn't felt in years, a jolt of pure rage and disbelief coursed through him. "That's a lie," he snarled, his hand instinctively gripping the butt of his Colt Peacemaker. "That's a damn cruel lie. What kind of game are you playing?" Martha Blevins didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her expression unreadable, her sheer physical presence a wall against his anger. "It's no game. Pull that pistol if it makes you feel better, but it won't change the truth. I don't deal in lies, Boone. They're inefficient. My daughter is dead," he insisted, his voice breaking. The memory was tearing through him, raw and visceral. "I held her. She was. She was cold." He remembered the small, still form wrapped in a blanket, the town doctor, old Doc Evans, shaking his head with that sorrowful look. He remembered the fog of his own grief. "What you held was a child, yes," Martha said, her voice softening just a fraction, a calculated sliver of empathy. "But it wasn't Sarah. It was the Miller family's infant, who had passed from the same sickness that very morning. Doc Evans owed them a significant debt." The Millers, the pious folk from up north? Why? Cody's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fury. "Think back, Boone," Martha urged, taking a step closer. "The fire at your barn. It wasn't just an accident. It was a distraction. While you and your ranch hands fought the blaze, someone went into your house. Your wife was weak with the fever. You were exhausted. It was chaos. Sarah was taken then." "Taken by who?" he demanded. "Why would Doc Evans lie?" "Doc Evans is dead now, so he can't answer for himself," she said. "But my late husband, Angus, kept meticulous records. He knew the secrets of every man in this valley. Angus had dealings with a man named Bartholomew Corian. I imagine you know the name." Cody's blood ran cold. Corian, the snake who owned the vast Sea-Bar Ranch to the east. A man known for his greed and his ruthlessness. The very man who had been pressuring the bank to call in Cody's loan. "What's Corian got to do with this?" "Corian wanted your land, even then. It has the best access to the summer pastures in the high country. He knew you wouldn't sell, but he also knew you were stubborn. Removing your family, your reason to fight, would break you. He paid Doc Evans to orchestrate the whole thing. The doctor swapped the children, declared Sarah dead, and gave her to the Miller family, who were childless and desperate for a miracle. They were told she was an orphan from a wagon train attack. They don't know the truth. Corian figured you'd drink yourself to death, or simply drift away within a year. Every word was a hammer blow, rearranging the last 2 years of his life into a landscape of horrific deception. The grief he had nurtured, the sacred sorrow he had built his broken life around. It was all a lie. Sarah, alive. The thought was a tiny, brilliant spark in the darkness of his soul. How? He rasped, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a desperate, terrifying hope. How do you know this? Proof. I need proof. Martha reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. It was shaped like a heart. She tossed it to him. Cody caught it, his hands trembling. He fumbled with the clasp, his fingers clumsy and numb. He knew this locket. He had given it to his wife, Faye, who had placed their daughter's first tiny blonde curl inside it. He snapped it open. The tiny curl was still there. It was found near the Miller's homestead a month ago by one of my men, Martha explained. He knew Angus had been investigating Corian's past dealings and brought it to me. I recognized it from Angus's notes. He suspected something was wrong about your daughter's death for a long time but could never prove it. He was a paranoid man, Boone. It was one of his greatest strengths. He wrote everything down. Cody sank back into his chair, the locket clutched in his hand like a holy relic. Alive. His Sarah was alive. A new, sharper pain pierced him, the thought of his daughter alone with strangers for 2 years, believing her parents were gone. So this marriage, Cody looked up at Martha, seeing her now not as an intruder, but as a harbinger of an impossible truth. This is the price. It is, she confirmed, her tone returning to business. Let me be plain. My husband's will is a complicated and controlling document, just like the man who wrote it. He stipulated that I must remarry within 18 months of his death, or control of Blevins Bend, the entire estate, transfers to a trust. She paused, letting the weight of her next words land. A trust managed by his former business partner. Corian, Cody breathed. The very same man. Martha nodded. The deadline is in 2 months. Corian has been waiting like a coyote for this day. He thinks I'm a weak woman who can't find a willing man. He is mistaken. But I need a man who won't challenge my authority over my own ranch. A marriage of convenience. That's where you come in. We marry. I file the paperwork. The ranch is secured in my name permanently. In return, I give you the information and the resources, the men, the firepower, to get your daughter back from the Millers. And believe me, you will need them. They won't give her up easily. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. It was a war on 2 fronts, her war for her legacy, his war for his daughter, and their enemy was the same man, Bartholomew Corian. Why me? Cody asked again, but this time with understanding. There are other desperate men. Because your fight is my fight, she said, her eyes glinting with cold fire. Corian tried to ruin you to weaken the valley before coming after Angus. He is the reason your daughter was stolen. Getting her back is not just a reward for you. It's a blow against him. It's justice. Angus was many things, but he believed in a certain kind of justice. And so do I. Cody looked at the silver locket, then at the vast, empty land around him. For 2 years, he had been a dead man walking. Martha Blevins wasn't offering him a return to his old life. That life was gone forever. She was offering him a reason to live a new one. She was offering him a war to fight. She was offering him his daughter. He stood up, his back straight for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. He met her gaze, man to woman, equal to equal, 2 desperate souls bound by a common enemy and an impossible goal. When do we ride for Redemption Gulch? He asked. The preacher won't marry us without a license. A slow, genuine smile finally touched Martha Blevins' lips. It transformed her harsh features, revealing a flicker of the woman beneath the armor. I have the license already, she said, pulling a folded paper from her vest. I had the judge draw it up this morning. I don't like to waste time. Cody could only shake his head. He was making a deal with a force of nature. But for the first time in 2 years, the howling wind didn't sound like a lament. It sounded like the promise of a coming storm. And for the first time in 2 years, he was ready to ride into it. The ride to Blevins Bend was a silent education in scale. Cody's Triple B could fit into a corner of one of Martha's pastures. The main house was not a cabin, but a sprawling two-story ranch house built of thick pine logs and riverstone, with a wide veranda that surveyed the entire valley. It was less a home and more a fortress, a testament to the ambition of the man who had built it, and the tenacity of the woman who now commanded it. Cody felt like a stray dog brought in from the rain. The Blevins Bend crew, a dozen tough, sun-beaten men, watched him with open suspicion as he and Martha rode in. They saw their formidable boss, their giant widow, returning with a man who looked like he'd been pulled from a ditch. Their loyalty was to her and to the memory of Angus Blevins. Cody was an outsider, an unknown quantity. The foreman, a leathery man named Hector, with a drooping mustache and weary eyes, was the first to approach. He addressed only Martha, his gaze flicking to Cody, sizing him up and finding him wanting. "Ma'am, everything all right?" "Everything is as it should be, Hector," Martha announced, her voice ringing with an authority that left no room for debate. "This is Cody Boone, my husband. He'll be staying in the main house. See that his mare is cared for." A ripple of shock went through the assembled men. The word husband landed like a physical blow. Hector's jaw went slack for a second before he caught himself, his expression hardening into a mask of professional stoicism. "Yes, ma'am." He gave Cody a look that was pure, undiluted suspicion before turning to bark orders at a younger hand. Inside, the house was furnished with heavy dark wood furniture, Navajo rugs, and the mounted heads of elk and bear. It smelled of beeswax, leather, and money. It was a man's house, Angus Blevins' house, and Martha seemed to move through it like a custodian rather than its owner. She showed Cody to a room at the far end of the upper floor, distinctly separate from her own quarters. "This will be yours," she said simply. "Our arrangement is a legal and public one. Our private lives remain our own. Your primary concern and mine is the matter of your daughter." That night, she laid out Angus's notes on a large oak table in the study. The dead man's handwriting was a precise, almost surgical script. It was a dossier of deception, detailing Corian's financial pressures on local homesteaders, his secret dealings, and his long-standing ambition to control the valley. The notes on Cody's tragedy were chillingly detailed. Dates, names, payments made to Doc Evans. It was all there. Angus never moved against Corian on this because he lacked definitive proof connecting Corian directly to the child, Martha explained, her large finger tracing a line of text. He had the motive, he had the conspiracy with the doctor, but not the smoking gun. Corian is slippery. Finding Sarah, having her testify that she was taken. That changes things. A new kind of life began for Cody, a life of strange dualities. By day, he was the husband of the wealthiest landowner in the territory, but he felt the constant, probing eyes of the crew. He was an appendage, a necessary component in Martha's plan. He spent hours on the veranda, staring north in the direction of the Miller homestead, the locket a constant, warm weight in his pocket. The reluctant partnership between him and Martha began to form, not in conversation, but in shared silence and common purpose. They would sit at opposite ends of the long dining table, eating in a quiet that was thick with unspoken thoughts. He saw the burden she carried. She, in turn, saw a man slowly coming back to life, the haunted look in his eyes being replaced by a flinty resolve. The first move from their enemy came not with a threat, but with a simple, grim report. A week after the wedding, a rider galloped in from the north pasture, his face pale. "It's the creek, ma'am," he told Martha, ignoring Cody completely. "Dead cattle, at least a dozen. Water's been fouled upstream." Martha's face became a mask of cold fury. She knew instantly who was responsible. This wasn't random. It was a message. Martha and Cody rode out with Hector and a few other men. The scene was grim. The carcasses of prize Hereford cattle, bloated and surrounded by flies, lay scattered along the banks of what should have been a crystal-clear mountain stream. The water had an oily sheen and a foul chemical smell. "It's not natural," Hector grunted, poking at the bank with his boot. "Someone dumped something. This is Corian's work." "He's testing me," Martha said, her voice low and dangerous, "trying to bleed me." Cody dismounted and walked upstream. He wasn't a cattle baron, but he knew the land. He found the tracks half hidden in the brush. 2 horses and a heavy wagon. They had come down from a high ridge that bordered Corian's property. He followed them for a quarter-mile until he found it. A discarded empty barrel stamped with a skull and crossbones. Sheep dip, poisonous in high concentrations. He returned not to Martha, but to Hector. "Wagon tracks came from the C-Bar Ridge. Left this behind." He kicked the barrel. Hector looked from the barrel to Cody, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. He had assumed Cody was just some sad sack Martha had picked up, but the man had instincts. He knew how to read the land. That evening, as if on cue, Bartholomew Corian himself rode into the yard of Blevins Bend, flanked by 2 of his hard-faced C-Bar riders. He was a stark contrast to Martha, a portly man with a florid face, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the saddle. He oozed a false charm that was slimier than the creek water. He dismounted, tipping his hat to Martha, who stood on the veranda, Cody now standing beside her. "Martha, my dear," Corian boomed, his eyes flicking over Cody with dismissive amusement. "I heard a terrible rumor about some misfortune with your cattle. I came to offer my sincerest condolences, and my help, of course." "We are handling it, Bartholomew," Martha said, her voice dripping ice. Corian's smile widened. "And I see you found company," he said, his gaze lingering on Cody. "I must confess the whole valley is buzzing. Martha Blevins, married, and to Mr. Boone no less, a man of recent financial difficulties, I hear. I do hope you haven't been taken advantage of, my dear." Before Martha could respond, Cody stepped forward. He wasn't the broken man from the Triple B porch. He was standing on the veranda of a fortress with a war to fight and a daughter to save. "The only one taking advantage around here, Corian," Cody said, his voice low and steady, "is the man who poisons water holes. We found your barrel. Next time you send your errand boys onto Blevins' land, I'll send them back draped over their saddles." Corian's jovial mask slipped. His eyes narrowed into piggish slits. The threat coming from this resurrected man had clearly hit its mark. He stared at Cody, then at the unyielding face of Martha, and seemed to understand that the dynamic had changed. This wasn't just a widow he was dealing with anymore. It was a partnership. "Strong words from a man with nothing to his name," Corian sneered. "I have a new name now," Cody replied, gesturing to the woman beside him. "And you'd be wise to remember it." Corian mounted his horse, his face purple with repressed rage. "You'll regret this. Both of you. That ranch should have been mine." He spurred his horse and galloped away, his men following close behind. The dust they kicked up settled in the quiet evening air. Martha looked at Cody, a new light in her eyes. It wasn't warmth, not yet. It was acknowledgement, a recognition of an ally. "He knows we're a threat now," she said. "He'll become more desperate, more dangerous." "Good," Cody said, his hand unconsciously touching the locket in his pocket. "It means we're getting closer. When do we go to look for my daughter?" "Tomorrow," Martha replied, "at first light." The journey north began before the sun had fully crested the mountains, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gray. It wasn't a large, imposing posse designed to intimidate. Martha was too shrewd for that. It was a small, purposeful group. Martha on her powerful Frisian, Cody on a sturdy gelding from the Blevins stables, and Hector, who after the incident with Corian had insisted on accompanying them. His initial suspicion of Cody had morphed into a grudging, watchful respect. He didn't trust the arrangement, but he trusted the steel he now saw in Cody's eyes. They carried supplies for a week, traveling light and fast. Martha had Angus's notes, which included a hand-drawn map of the area around the Miller homestead, marking watering holes and potential lookout points. Angus, it seemed, had been planning this very trip before his heart gave out. "The Millers are isolated," Martha explained as they rode. her voice a low murmur against the steady rhythm of the hooves. They live in a small, wooded valley about 2 days' ride from here. Their names are Jacob and Esther Miller. Devout. They keep to themselves. According to Angus's sources, they believe the child they have, the child they call Grace, was a divine gift, an answer to their prayers. Grace. The name was a punch to Cody's gut. They had renamed his Sarah. They had erased her. The smoldering hope in his chest was stoked by a fresh wave of anger. Their first stop was a small, dusty trading post called Flat Rock, the last outpost of civilization before the wilderness where the Millers lived. Cody's instructions from Martha were clear. Listen, don't talk. Ask questions, but not the wrong ones. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer and tobacco. A few grizzled prospectors eyed them as they entered. Cody and Hector moved to the bar. Whiskey, Cody said to the bartender, a man with a perpetually sour expression. He laid a coin on the bar, adding another beside it. And one for you. We're tracking some stray cattle. A prize bull might have wandered north into the hill country. Ever see folks from up that way? The bartender's eyes flicked to the extra coin and slid it into his pocket. Not many folks up that way to see, he grumbled, pouring 2 glasses. Just the Millers, God-fearing folk. Don't come down here much. Once every few months for flour and salt. That's about it. They keep to themselves then? Hector asked. The bartender scoffed. Like their garden's a secret. Got a little girl with them. See her sometimes in their wagon. Pale hair. Keeps her head down. Odd folk. Best to leave them be. Pale hair. Like Faye. Like Sarah. Cody's heart hammered against his ribs. He kept his face impassive, nodding slowly. They bought some supplies they didn't need and left. He's right, Hector said in a low voice once they were outside. They're guarding her. This won't be as simple as knocking on their door. It never was, Martha said, her gaze fixed on the northern trail. Corian will have eyes and ears everywhere. He might not know our exact purpose, but he knows we're on the move. Her words proved prophetic. The next day, as they navigated a narrow rock-strewn canyon, the sharp crack of a rifle echoed from the cliffs above. A chip of stone exploded from a rock face inches from Cody's head. Ambush! Hector yelled, already pulling his Winchester from its scabbard. They spurred their horses, seeking the cover of a rock outcropping as another shot kicked up dust behind Martha's horse. Cody's mind went into a cold, clear state of focus he hadn't known since his days fighting bandits on cattle drives. He slid from his horse, rifle in hand, and scrambled up the rocks, using the terrain for cover. Martha and Hector laid down suppressing fire, their shots pinning the unseen shooter in place. Cody moved with a hunter's instinct, circling around the shooter's position. He heard a scrabble of loose rock above him and froze. A man, lean and wiry, was trying to retreat, his back to Cody. He wore the brand of the C-Bar Ranch on his chaps. Drop it, Cody commanded, his voice as hard as iron. The man spun around, his rifle coming up, but Cody was faster. He didn't shoot to kill. He fired once, the bullet striking the man's rifle and sending it clattering to the ground. The man cried out, clutching a hand struck by flying splinters of wood. It was one of the riders who had been with Corian at the ranch. They tied him up. He was sullen and defiant at first, but Hector's methods of persuasion were brutally effective. Corian sent you, Cody stated. It wasn't a question. The man spat on the ground. He said to track you, said you were up to no good, just wanted us to spook you, send you running back home. He knows where we're going? Martha asked, her shadow looming over the captive. No, the man admitted, wincing as Hector tightened a rope. He don't know why you're up here, just that you are. It makes him nervous. He offered a bonus to anyone who could put a scare into you. They left the man tied securely to a tree a mile off the main trail. He would be found eventually, but not before they were long gone. The ambush confirmed their fears. Corian was watching. He was paranoid and getting reckless. They rode on, the mood now more tense, more urgent. The landscape grew wilder, the trees thicker. Finally, following Martha's map, they crested a ridge and looked down into a small, secluded valley. A thread of smoke rose from a stone chimney in the center of a neat homestead, a log cabin, a small barn, fenced-in fields. It was an idyllic, peaceful scene. And there, by a small vegetable garden, was a woman in a simple dress and a young girl. The girl was chasing a butterfly, her laughter carrying faintly on the wind. She had pale blonde hair that shone like spun gold in the afternoon sun. Cody's breath caught in his throat. He felt dizzy, as if the world had dropped out from under him. 2 years of grief, 2 years of emptiness, coalesced into this single heart-stopping moment. He raised a hand, as if he could reach across the distance and touch her. It was her. It was Sarah. His daughter was alive and laughing in the sun, and he was a stranger on a hill, a ghost from a life she couldn't possibly remember. The sight of his daughter, so close and yet so impossibly far, paralyzed Cody. Every instinct screamed for him to charge down the hill, to sweep her into his arms and never let go. But the cold reality of the situation, the presence of Martha and Hector beside him, held him in check. This wasn't a reunion. It was an extraction, and it was fraught with peril. "We can't go in like an army," Martha said, her voice a low, steadying rumble. "They're not criminals, not in their own minds. They believe she is their child. To them, we are the threat." "So what do we do?" Cody asked, his voice strained, never taking his eyes off the small figure in the garden. "Knock on the door and say there's been a misunderstanding?" "Something like that," Martha replied, her gaze thoughtful. "But you won't be the one to do it. Not at first. A strange man appearing on their doorstep will send them running for a rifle. I, however, am just a woman traveling. I'll approach alone. You and Hector will stay back, out of sight but close." Cody hated the idea. It felt like a betrayal, hiding while someone else approached his child. But he saw the logic in it. He was a tinderbox of emotion, and a single spark could set this whole valley ablaze. He nodded, his jaw tight. They watched as Martha rode down the gentle slope, her bearing calm and unthreatening. As she neared the homestead, the woman in the garden, Esther Miller, noticed her. She immediately put a protective arm around the little girl, pulling her close and backing slowly toward the cabin door. A man, Jacob Miller, emerged from the cabin, a hunting rifle held loosely but readily in his hands. He was tall and gaunt, with the severe, unyielding face of a zealot. Martha reined in her horse a respectful distance from the fence. "Good day to you," she called out, her voice carrying clearly. "I mean you no harm. My name is Martha. I'm traveling north and was hoping I might trouble you for some fresh water." Jacob Miller's eyes were narrowed slits of suspicion. "We don't get many travelers this way." "Which is why I'm grateful to have found a friendly face," Martha said with a disarming pleasantness Cody had never heard from her before. From his vantage point, Cody could see Sarah, Grace, peeking out from behind Esther's skirts. Her eyes were wide with curiosity. She looked healthy, cared for. The thought brought a strange, conflicting mix of relief and resentment. These people had loved his daughter, but they had loved a lie. Jacob eventually gave a curt nod, and Esther disappeared into the cabin, returning with a bucket of water. As Martha dismounted to let her horse drink, she kept up a steady stream of casual conversation. She was trying to build a bridge of normalcy before dropping a bomb on it. "You have a lovely daughter," Martha said, smiling towards the little girl. Esther Miller beamed with a fierce maternal pride. "She is a gift from the Lord, a true miracle." That was the opening. "Miracles are a powerful thing," Martha said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more serious. "Sometimes they are not what they seem." The mood changed instantly. Jacob's hand tightened on his rifle. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean," Martha said, looking directly at Esther, "that I know where your miracle came from. I know about Doc Evans. I know about the fire at the Triple B Ranch. And I know the child's real name is Sarah Boone." Esther Miller gasped, her face draining of all color. Jacob raised the rifle, his knuckles white. "Lies! The devil sends liars to test the faithful. Get off our land." "Her father is waiting," Martha said, her voice firm, refusing to be intimidated. "He's been grieving for 2 years, believing his only child was dead." At that moment, Sarah, sensing the terrible tension, began to cry. The sound cut through Cody like a knife. That was his signal. He and Hector broke from the cover of the trees, riding not at a charge but at a steady, determined pace down into the valley. The sight of 2 more riders, both armed, sent Jacob Miller into a panic. "I knew it! You've come to harm us, to take our grace." He leveled the rifle directly at Martha. "No!" Cody's voice was a roar of thunder. He threw himself from the saddle while the horse was still moving, landing hard but rolling to his feet. "Don't you point that at her!" Sarah shrieked at the sight of this wild-looking man, burying her face in Esther's dress. To her, Cody was a terrifying stranger. The realization was a fresh wound. "Sarah," he breathed, taking a step forward, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Sarah, it's me." She didn't recognize him. Her face was a mask of fear. "You see what you've done?" Esther sobbed, clutching the child. "You're frightening her. She's ours. The Lord gave her to us." The standoff was a powder keg. Jacob, terrified and resolute. Esther, hysterical with a mother's fear. Cody, desperate and heartbroken. Suddenly, another rifle shot cracked through the valley, but it hadn't come from Jacob Miller or anyone in their group. A C-bar rider, the same one they'd left tied to a tree, emerged from the woods along with two other men. He must have gotten free sooner than they'd thought and doubled back. "Looks like you found him, boss," he yelled towards the ridgeline. And then Bartholomew Corian appeared on the ridge, sitting on his horse like a king surveying his domain. He had followed them. He had waited. "Well, well, well," Corian's voice boomed across the small valley. "What a touching family reunion. Trespassing, frightening God-fearing folk, trying to steal a child. Boone, you've sunk lower than I thought possible. And Martha, my dear, consorting with kidnappers. Tusk, tusk. The board of that trust will be very interested to hear about this." He had played them perfectly. He hadn't known their exact plan, but by following them, he had stumbled into a scene he could twist to his own advantage. He could paint Cody as a deranged criminal and Martha as his accomplice, ruining her reputation and her claim to the ranch. "Sheriff Brody is on his way," Corian announced with a smug grin. "I sent a rider for him an hour ago. He'll be here soon to sort this out. And I think I know whose story he'll believe." The trap had sprung. They were caught between the Miller's righteous terror and Corian's malevolent scheming. Cody looked at his daughter, who was weeping in the arms of another woman, and at the smirking face of the man who had orchestrated his entire nightmare. The hope of a simple reunion was gone, replaced by the certainty of a violent reckoning. Corian's arrival shifted the balance of the standoff from a tragic confrontation to a deadly siege. His plan was diabolical and clear. Use the impending arrival of the law to frame Cody and Martha, thereby neutralizing them both. He sat on the ridge like a vulture, savoring the chaos he had engineered. "It's over, Boone," Corian shouted, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. "When Sheriff Brody gets here, he'll see a grieving family defending their home from a known drunk and his wealthy accomplice. Your claim will be worth less than the dust on your boots." Jacob Miller, seeing Corian and his men as saviors, grew bolder. "You heard him. The law is coming. Now leave us in peace." He kept his rifle trained on Cody, his finger twitching on the trigger. Cody's mind raced. They were trapped. If they fought, they proved Corian right. If they surrendered, they lost Sarah forever, and Martha would lose her ranch. There was no good way out. It was Martha who broke the stalemate. Her voice cut through the tension, cold and sharp as a razor. "Hector! The west flank, now!" It was a feint, a gamble. Hector, understanding instantly, spurred his horse and galloped hard toward the western side of the valley, letting out a wild yell as if leading a charge of non-existent men. The move was pure distraction. Two of Corian's men, startled, wheeled their horses to face the perceived threat. Their attention momentarily diverted. In that split second, Martha acted. She didn't draw her pistol. She spurred her massive Frisian forward, not at Cody or the Millers, but directly towards Corian's remaining man at the base of the ridge. The sheer size and speed of the horse was terrifying. The C-bar rider, caught off guard, fired a wild shot before his horse shied violently, unseating him. At the same time, Cody moved. He didn't go for Jacob Miller. He ran towards Sarah. "Esther, get the girl in the house, now!" he yelled, his voice a command born of pure, protective instinct. His sudden move, not to attack, but to shield, confused Jacob. Esther, however, reacted instinctively to the danger of gunfire, pulling the crying Sarah towards the cabin door. Corian, enraged that his perfect scenario was unraveling, drew his own pistol. "Fools! Kill them! Kill them all!" The valley erupted into a chaotic symphony of gunfire. Hector, using the trees as cover, exchanged shots with the two riders he had drawn away. Martha, having neutralized one man, slid from her saddle, using her horse as a shield while she drew her own sidearm. Cody's only focus was Sarah. As Esther fumbled with the cabin door, one of Corian's men on the ridge took aim at them. Cody saw the glint of the sun on the rifle barrel. Without a thought for his own life, he threw himself in front of Esther and Sarah, shielding them with his body just as a bullet tore through the fleshy part of his left shoulder. The impact spun him around, the pain a searing flash of white heat. He gritted his teeth, refusing to go down. He drew his Colt and returned fire, his shot wild but enough to make the gunman duck for cover. "Get inside!" he roared at Esther, who stared at him, her face a mask of shock and terror. She had just seen this devil, this kidnapper, take a bullet meant for her or the child she claimed as her own. The sight seemed to break through Jacob Miller's wall of pious certainty. He saw Corian's men firing indiscriminately into his homestead. He saw the stranger, the man he believed was his enemy, bleeding to protect his family. The lines of good and evil, so clear in his mind moments before, were now blurred into a mess of smoke and blood. With a cry of rage, Jacob turned his rifle away from Cody and fired towards the ridge, at the men who were truly threatening his home. The tide had turned. It was now the Blevins party and the Millers against Corian's ambition. Corian, seeing his plan disintegrate into a full-blown gunfight he was now losing, became desperate. He saw Cody, wounded but still standing, ushering Esther and Sarah into the relative safety of the cabin. He saw Martha and Hector methodically pinning down his men. His chance to use the law was gone. This was now about survival and revenge. He spurred his horse down the slope, firing wildly at Cody. "You, Boone! This is all because of you. You should have stayed broken." Cody shoved the cabin door shut behind Esther and turned to face his nemesis. His left arm was useless, slick with blood, but his right hand held his Colt steady. The world narrowed to the space between him and the charging, portly man on the horse. It was the culmination of 2 years of pain, a reckoning for a stolen child in a ruined life. He let Corian come closer, the man's face a mask of apoplectic rage. Cody stood his ground, raised his pistol, took a steady breath, and fired. Once, twice. The first shot struck Corian's horse, which screamed and stumbled, throwing its rider. The second shot caught Corian in the chest as he fell. The cattle baron landed in the dust of the miller's yard with a heavy, final thud. Silence descended upon the valley, broken only by the whimpering of a wounded horse and the ragged gasps of the combatants. Corian's remaining men, seeing their leader fall, lost their nerve and fled into the wilderness. Cody stood over the man who had caused him so much misery, the Colt smoking in his hand. The adrenaline began to fade, and a wave of dizziness washed over him as the pain in his shoulder flared. He staggered, and then Martha was there, her strong arm supporting him. "It's over, Cody," she said, her voice filled with a weary respect. The cabin door creaked open. Esther Miller peered out, her eyes wide. Behind her, Jacob stood, his rifle now pointing at the ground. They looked at the blood on Cody's shirt, at the dead man in their yard, and then at each other. The terrible, undeniable truth of what had happened and what had been done to them was finally dawning. From behind Esther's skirts, Sarah, Grace, peeked out. Her crying had stopped. She wasn't looking at the dead man or the smoke. She was staring at Cody, at the man who had stood between her and the gunfire. Her expression was no longer one of fear, but of wide-eyed, childish wonder. The arrival of Sheriff Brody found not a crime scene, but a resolution written in dust and blood. A terrified and remorseful Jacob Miller, his faith shattered and rebuilt on the bedrock of truth, quickly confessed the entire story. The deception by Doc Evans, the attack by Corian's men, and Cody Boone's selfless heroism. With Corian's body lying as the ultimate testimony to his own villainy, any legal threat to Martha evaporated. The law was there merely to sweep up the ashes of a defeated enemy. Inside the Miller cabin, The air was thick with sorrow, not anger. Cody, his arm bandaged tightly, faced the couple who had loved his stolen daughter. He felt no hatred, only a profound sadness for the pain they all shared. "She needs to be with her father," he said, his voice quiet but unbreakable. Esther Miller, looking at the man who had taken a bullet for the child she called Grace, could only nod through her tears. A compassionate peace was made. Sarah would go home with her father, but the Millers, who had given her a home when she had none, would not be erased from her life. The reunion with Sarah was a delicate dance. She was shy, drawn to this stranger by some instinct she couldn't name, yet fearful of the violent storm he had brought with him. Cody didn't force it. He simply existed in her space, a quiet, constant, protective presence. That afternoon, as he sat on the Miller's porch, she approached and gently touched the bandage on his arm. "Did it hurt?" she whispered. "It did," Cody said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it was worth it to keep you safe." She looked into his eyes then, searching for a memory and finding a feeling that ran deeper than memory itself. "Papa?" The word was a key, unlocking 2 years of grief and letting it flood out of him, replaced by a light he thought was extinguished forever. He nodded, unable to speak, and she leaned against his good side, a quiet surrender that mended his soul. Days later, on the grand veranda of Blevins Bend, a new kind of quiet settled over the ranch. Sarah slept soundly in a chair nearby, the setting sun catching the gold in her hair. "You have your daughter," Martha stated, her voice softer than Cody had ever heard it. "The contract is fulfilled." Cody looked at the powerful woman who had become his unlikely ally, then at his sleeping child. This was more than a business deal. It was a foundation. "The contract was for a husband," he replied, his voice steady and clear. "It never said for how long. My daughter and I, we found our home, if you'll have us." Martha Blevins, the giant widow who had sought only to protect her legacy, looked at the man and child who had become a part of it. A slow, genuine smile transformed her strong features. "It's a big house," she said. "It needs a family." And so the story of Cody Boone and Martha Blevins comes to a close. It began not with a whisper of love, but with a stark, desperate contract. It's a powerful reminder that in the unforgiving landscapes of life, family isn't always something you're born into. Sometimes it's something you build, forged in the fires of shared struggle and sealed with loyalty and grit. Theirs was never a fairy tale romance, but a partnership grounded in something deeper: mutual respect and the fierce, protective instinct to build a safe harbor in a brutal world. They found their salvation not in what they were supposed to be, but in what they chose to become, for each other and for the strong daughter who became the heart of their unlikely home. If this tale of resilience and unconventional family resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story, and be sure to subscribe for more dramas from the heart of history. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. Thank you for listening.